My friends, it is Wednesday, November 26th. I don't know how to describe what's happening better than the metaphor that they're all playing games. All the major players are playing the same game, well, different games on the same field. So they're all in the same venue talking about the same thing, but they have very different ends. And I talked about this with the different motivations between key players before, but I'll try to explain more about what I mean here in just a moment. So let's try to work our way through the news today. Trump says he's ready to sit down with both Zelensky and Putin, but only once a deal to end the war is either finalized or entering its decisive phase. So that's a new statement from Trump that he's like, we're going to. So does that mean he's walking away? I don't think so, but he's only going to do that then. But while he keeps saying we're making tremendous progress and tremendous progress. Now, he's also dispatched Steve Witkoff, and we'll talk about him some more, to meet with Putin while he's sending Christopher Driscoll to engage with the Ukrainian side. Looks like Keith Kellogg's going to be out by January, and maybe Christopher Driscoll is the new guy. But here's Trump's Truth Social post. Over the past week, my team has made tremendous progress. He's always talking about how tremendous progress. We're so close, but he's not close. And his whole motivation for this game is to get a deal and look good getting the deal. Now, there are some people like Gary Kasparov that said, and he's looking for graft personally for his family as well. I'm not sure if it's that or if he just wants a deal for legacy or whatever, but he just wants a deal. He has very different motivation than the Ukrainians, and that's different motivation than the Russians. Okay, with respect to ending the war between Russia and Ukraine, a war that never would have happened if I were president, the original 28 peace plan, which was drafted by the United States. He's doubling down on this, which was drafted by the United States. This just came out yesterday, which wasn't drafted by the United States. It came from Russia and, yeah, has been fine-tuned with additional input from both sides, and there are only a few remaining points of disagreement. In the hopes of finalizing this peace plan, I have directed my special envoy, Steve Witkoff, to meet with President Putin in Moscow at the same time as the Secretary of the Army, Driscoll, will be meeting with the Ukrainians. All bad. I mean, it's all like Driscoll is not a friend of Ukraine. Okay, I look forward to hopefully meeting with President Zelensky and President Putin soon, but only when the deal to end this war is final. So he's changed, and again, but his motivation what his end goal is just to make a deal, and it's not about the deal, or it's not about what's in the deal so much as the deal. Okay, Trump on Tuesday sought to shrug off the now infamous 28-point peace plan for Russia and Ukraine, the one that infuriated Kyiv and rattled Europe and sparked a revolt on Capitol Hill, even among Republicans, claiming it was nothing more than a map or a concept. That's because it was handed to him by the Russians who put this together, and they said, hey, look at this thing that we worked out together, and okay, so that's our plan, okay, go with it. Because he's not really interested in the details of the plan or how fair or just it is. He's interested in getting a deal. Now, I just talked about this, leaked or planted. There was this leaked call between Ushakov and Dmitriev, and then another one between Dmitriev and Steve Witkoff. And I talked all about that, and they were talking about, well, how was it leaked? I don't know. We didn't leak it. It looks like it's very suspicious that if they didn't, who would have? And it helps them to get to their end. The Russians' goal is they're playing the game to not actually sue for peace, to actually continue the war while looking like you're actually trying to sue for peace. The first draft of the peace plan was drawn up by the Kremlin. Bloomberg leaks Ushakov, Dmitriev called. The publication shows that Ushakov and Dmitriev plan to pass the Kremlin's proposal on a peace plan to the United States so that the American side could present it as their own. Dmitriev even said, no, look, I think we just have to draw up this paper as if it were our position, and I'll just informally hand it over. That is all informal, and they can present it as their own. Yeah, that's what they were trying to do, and that's essentially what happened. So Trump's asked about this, and he's asked about this on Air Force One, and part of this, the audio that you're going to see, is part of what he was saying in response, but he also said this, well, they're making concessions. They're a big concession when he's asked about what the Russians' concessions are, because the Ukrainians are being asked to give up all of Donbass. Well, what's their concession? Their big concession is that they stop fighting and they don't take any more land. That's not a concession. That's something that they might do in the future. That's not a concession, but the reality is on the ground now. Here's Trump being asked about it. Trump responded to the leaked Witkoff-Ushakov call, calling such talk standard, like, oh, well, this leak, yeah, but, this happens all the time in negotiations. He said Witkoff's job is to sell this to Ukraine and sell Ukraine to Russia. claiming that this is how deal makers operate. Trump added that Russia's big concession is stopping the war and not taking more land. Here we are.
I haven't heard it, no, but that's a standard thing, because he's got to sell this to Ukraine. He's got to sell Ukraine to Russia. That's what a deal maker does.
Okay, so that's he's got to sell this. He's got to sell that. That's what a deal maker does.
Hey, look, they want this. You got to convince them of this. That's a very standard form of negotiation. I haven't heard it, but I heard it was a standard negotiation. And I would imagine he's saying the same thing to Ukraine, because each party has to give and take.
Each party has to give and take. And so,
I'm worried that he's too pro-Russian.
No, I think, look.
Are you worried that he's too pro-Russian, says the reporter?
This war could go on for years, and Russia's got a lot more people, got a lot more soldiers, So I think
he didn't say no. He said the war could go on for years, and Russia has a lot more people and more soldiers.
If Ukraine can make a deal, it's a good thing. I think it's great for both. Frankly, I think it's great for both. But Ukraine's got it's a much smaller group of people. They've lost a lot of people. Russia's lost a lot of people, but Russia has a much bigger pool of people.
Yeah, Russia has much more people. They have a larger pool of people. The war can go on for years. It's not comforting, but he's not playing the honest broker side. He's acting as a mediator, but his finger's tilted on the Russian side. Okay, so Michael McFowle is asking this: given all of Witkoff's mistakes, it's time for for Trump to finally let Rubio do the job that Trump selected Rubio to do as Secretary of the State. And the Senate voted for Rubio to do it, but Trump's not playing that game. He's playing a different game where he's sending Witkoff to be his negotiator because he wants Witkoff who acts differently than what Rubio acts like. So they're playing different games. NBC News reported that U.S. Army Secretary warned Ukraine of an inevitable defeat. Rubio denied these claims. The article stated that Russia's attacks are intensifying and that Moscow can wage war for a very long time. So peace talks should begin now before the situation gets worse. So Driscoll apparently said, hey, we just got to get this blank done. That's the attitude of the United States, of we just got to get a deal done, as opposed to a just deal that Ukraine can live with that's not going to kick off another war somewhere down the line. Now, Driscoll's an interesting character. He's a personal friend of J.D. Vance from their time at Yale. That's why he's being sent there as the Secretary of the Army, because Secretary of the Army has other things that he should be doing, like modernizing the U.S. Army so that it's prepared for whatever the next challenge is. He's not supposed to be a negotiator like this, but he's a personal friend of J.D. Vance. Okay. The Trump administration did threaten to cut off Ukraine intel and weapon sales if they didn't assign the Kushner-Witkoff Kremlin list of demands. That seems like that was part of the at least implied threat. More on the origins of the reports of the U.S. threatened to cut off intel sharing to Ukraine last week after the first version of the peace plan dropped. From our reporting, they said this: sent by the White House, U.S. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll arrived in Ukrainian capital November 19th to discuss defense issues and the prospects of peace with Russia. After a flurry of phone calls with President Vance and other officials, Driscoll received approval to brief Ukrainian defense officials on a version of the U.S. plan, including Zelensky the following day. Driscoll also issued a reminder the White House had cut off intelligence and weapons assistance to Ukraine months earlier before resuming aid, insinuating that Trump could do it again. Now, that happened when they had to flee Kursk because the intelligence was cut off and then they were blinded and they were in a poor position. So again, they're playing a very different game than the Ukrainians are playing. Even calling it a game, I'm sorry about that. It's the best metaphor I can come up with. If you have a better way of explaining it, put it in the comments below. Okay, according to Politico, Marco Rubio refused to meet with EU diplomat Kaja Kallas as discussions about Trump's peace initiative continue. The publication notes that Kallas has largely withdrawn from public diplomacy due to her difficult relationship with Trump's team. Even Rubio regarded the administration's most pro-European high-ranking figure is declining to engage in bilateral talks with Kallas. Politico adds that Kallas is acting as the bad cop, organizing and guiding the EU member states behind the scenes. So even Rubio is kind of fallen a little bit short here, even though in his heart of hearts, I know he doesn't want Putin to prevail. I mean, it's a weird thing. Now, it looks like Jared Kushner is going to go to Moscow too. Well, why? Like I talked about Kushner yesterday. Informally, he has a role, but he has no formal position, but Trump trusts him. That's part of the game. Putin now has full control of the U.S. president, merely being offered his crew being offered pie in the sky by Russian business deals. Yeah, look, they're trying. What Russia wants to do is get to a place where, hey, look, if you drop sanctions, we can do some deals. Like, I mean, that's what we got to get to. And Trump wants that. That's enticing to him. He's not worried so much about what the peace deal is as long as we get to that. They all think that they're going to make fortunes investing in Russia. Well, maybe. I mean, this is all commentary, but I think this is kind of the direction that things are going. Garry Kasparov amplifies that point, focusing on Witkoff misses the big picture in these so-called peace plan revelations. It's what many of us have said since January. The Trump family and team are allied with Russia against Ukraine and Europe for profit, and there are no U.S. national interests involved. Yeah, I mean, okay, that's the most jaded position. I don't think it's quite there. I think Trump just wants to make a deal, and he wants a legacy of having made a deal. Doesn't really care about the fine points of the deal. Okay, Macron, meanwhile, says that France and EU partners will soon finalize a plan to use frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine, offering financial security and pressure Moscow. UK-France-led group with US and Turkey will also shape post-war security guarantees. Well, that's where Macron's coming from. But then we see Starmer. There will be no European peace plan. Remember the 24-point plan? Ukraine's allies will work with the existing plan, the British Prime Minister said. Now, that's terrible because the 24-point European plan was actually pretty awesome. And to use the 28-point plan, which is now 19 points, as a guidelines, it's a bad place to start. Garry Kasparov again, American corruption plus European impotence equals Russian advantage and continued war. Yeah, maybe that's what's going on. The Trump administration is negotiating with Belarus now to release 100 plus political prisoners as part of a broader U.S. Minsk thaw. Reuters reported this. EU allies remain wary, fearing it rewards a Kremlin-aligned regime. Some U.S. sanctions may be eased in return, and that's the big fear because the last time they did this, they will ease sanctions on Belarusian airlines or that sort of thing, making things easier. So what are they going to get for? So Trump wants the victory lap of 100 released prisoners, and what's he going to give in return? Because he's going to give something. And it's probably something that's not going to be good for Belarus to get or the Russians to get indirectly through Belarus. Okay, Representative Mike Quigley questioned whether U.S. security guarantees under Trump can be trusted, especially by European allies. Quote, why would anyone believe a president who let Putin blow through 6 deadlines? He makes promises and nothing happens, just like the Tomahawks. He slaps tariffs on allies and tells NATO that they're on their own. It all changes month to month. Well, it's a good question. Part of what you need from leadership is stability, predictability, and we just don't have that here. We have something more akin to havoc. And when we're looking at today's Russian papers, this is Steve Rosenberg from the BBC saying, I look at how one headline in a Russian paper can say so much about the approach of the Russian authorities. Let's listen to 30 seconds of this and you'll understand what's being said.
Writes, Ukraine and the EU are trying to derail Trump's plan. With its strikes on Russia, Kyiv is demonstrating that it doesn't want peace. Let's look at the first.
Wait, Kyiv doesn't want peace? That's the message that the Russians are trying to project. It's the Europeans. They don't want peace. It's the Kyiv regime. They don't want peace. The Americans want peace. They're trying to get the peace. We want peace.
Part of that headline, Ukraine and the EU are trying to derail Trump's plan. From what Russian officials and the Russian media have been saying, it's clear that Moscow is trying to sow division between Ukraine and Europe on the one hand and America on the other, trying to cast Kyiv and the EU and Britain as warmongers, working against peace and trying to sabotage the peace process.
Yeah, they're the ones doing it. But the Russians are doing it. Russia says it won't make any concessions in a peace deal over its war in Ukraine. That's pretty much what was expected. Deputy Foreign Minister Witkoff, okay, so he's a guy that works directly under Sergei Lavrov, claims that all possible concessions were already made by Putin in Anchorage. Okay, let's hear what he has to say. He said this, we have long welcomed the Trump administration's efforts to find reasonable solutions, reasonable endings, various versions of this plan. This is a negotiating point. There can be no talk of any concessions, no surrender of our approaches to those key aspects of solving the problems facing us, including in the context of the special military operation. I emphasize that the various elements of anchorage are in themselves compromise solutions. So he's going back and saying, well, we already discussed this at Anchorage and we're sticking to that. Nobody knows what was discussed at Anchorage, but that's what the Russians keep talking about. President of the Russian Federation also spoke about this. This is the basis we will use as reference as we study and continue our discussion. Version that is currently on the table will be on the table, but this is a question of diplomatic and political technique and not a question that can be discussed online, since two serious things are currently in the spotlight. Essentially, we're not doing it. We're not doing anything else other than what we've already said in Anchorage, which is basically the 28-point plan. Witkoff makes it clear, says Michael McFaul, that Putin is not ready to compromise on anything. I told you that last week. There's going to be no compromise, even to a plan that's a sweetheart deal for them. Like Lavrov, he also reiterates that they are standing by the agreement in Anchorage. Seems like the rest of us don't know what actually happened in Anchorage. What was agreed upon there behind closed doors, we don't know, but we're not going to find out. Okay. They're all playing different games. I stand by that. Even, if you think that it's going to be over, even Polymarket shows Russia versus Ukraine ceasefire in 2025, only a 13% chance. Again, it's not going to happen anytime soon. And I'm going to stand by this. They're playing different games. Okay, shout out to Mark, a colleague, a Patreon colleague. Thank you for your support. Tell me what you thought about what you saw here in this video. Am I off in left field or does this sound right to you? Please tell me what you think. I would really like to know. Thank you for your time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person who cares about Ukraine.